And we are back to discuss some interesting piece of, I don't know if you could call this news, but it's an interesting little tidbit that popped up over the past couple of days. And essentially,
Yeah, why
this,
did it pop up now? Because isn't this interview isn't it a little old? Isn't it at least 6 months or a year old?
it's at the YouTuber's discretion when he wants to, make it public from his Patreon to his channel.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
So, for those of you who don't know, in a recent couple of days, Elio and Linda, people who are very close to George R.R. Martin, did an interview with a Spanish YouTuber. I believe the YouTube channel's name is Maglor, and it's in complete Spanish, I believe, for the most part, right, Preston?
Yeah. I mean,
And
the interview, the interview is in both Spanish and English. I mean, if you want to listen to it, you have no problem um, being an English speaker and because they have a translator, so they have everything.
their translator is just. I wish they got an actual English-speaking person to go into it because that translator it was a bit rough for me at times. But
Well,
regardless,
you have to remember that, I mean, the translator is going to be native to one of the languages, so he's a Spanish speaker is going to be like, oh, this is great because the translator is Spanish. So like, had it been the other way, the Spanish speakers would be like, oh man, I wish they got a native Spanish speaker, right?
I guess. But so Elio and Linda did an interview with this Spanish YouTuber in regards to the books. Now, normally, who the fuck cares? However, the reason this is somewhat important is because Elio and Linda are very close to George. For the audience who don't know, Preston, please tell them who Linda and Elio and Linda really are.
Elio and Linda well, years and years ago, they started out as kind of just big fans of Ice and Fire, and they kind of started a wiki with in keeping track of George's characters, and George thought this was great because it helped him keep track of things, and so in many ways, they became kind of just organizers of George's thoughts. And so he became, he doesn't speak with them that often, and they admit they sometimes go years without seeing him, but they communicate, via email and messages and things like that, and so they've had a relationship with George for, I mean, probably at least 15 years. And so, in fact, A Dance with Dragons is partially dedicated to Elio and Linda.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah. And so years later, when George wanted to put out The World of Ice and Fire, he asked Elio and Linda to kind of put together a book based on information that was already, in the the main series, and kind of put it for, and then he had notes on that would eventually become Fire and Blood, that he gave them to summarize for it. And so they did that. They organized everything in kind of an encyclopedia format, with, the Targaryen dynasty being one section, the areas of Westeros being another, and then the kind of the Essos being the next section. And then George got it, and he added a bunch of stuff, and that's what we kind of know as The World of Ice and Fire.
The incomplete encyclopedia, because there's a lot of information from there missing. I feel as though that book was released not a little too, very early.
Yeah.
I would have liked it to have been released after the fact.
Yeah, and Elio and Linda also run Westeros.org, which is a posting bulletin board site. They manage the wiki. And I'm trying to think, they also keep a database of things that George has said at cons or exchanges with fans called So Spake Martin, where it's kind of like off the cuff things that he's said that they just kind of think are canon, even though it's never appeared in a book. So for instance, Ashara Dane, in the book, she simply has committed suicide off of a tower, but at a con, somebody asked, did they ever find a body? And George said no. And so the fact that Ashara Dane's body has never been found and the fact that she might be alive has kind of infected the fandom. And, but it's actually not in the series at all that Ashara Dane's body was never found. It's just something George said at a con. So...
Well, first and foremost, I want to give 2 disclaimers regarding these people. The first being that they are not giving us definitive, concrete answers or anything in this interview. A lot of what is said by these 2 are their opinions on where the story is headed, how it'll be handled, and what's going on with the characters. Some of the stuff they do say sounds like they know it for a fact, and I will highlight those, but overall take what they say as speculation and theorizing. Now, if you're wondering why their opinions and theories would be worth making a video on, once again, as Preston said, they're the closest people to George outside of George's assistants and proteges. Elio and Linda, they're not just some random YouTuber with random theories. If anything, they're closely associated with George enough to where if they say something, I would be more willing to pay attention to them than some, random YouTuber.
Though they do have their own random theories. Like it's not not to say that, they are some sort of definitive source, and they'll never say that either.
Right,
like
right.
They're speculating as well. They've seen notes. There are notes they're allowed to talk about, and there's notes that they're not allowed to talk about, and they're pretty good at not talking about things that they're not supposed to talk about.
That's my point here. Like if they're commenting on a specific plot point or character, then it's like, it's safe to say that they either know something or have seen something to make them theorize in that specific direction. So, either from unreleased material or George himself. So once again, I have to point out that anything they say is not official, and everything here is their speculation and theorizing. That's the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is that Elio and Linda, mostly Linda, Elio, from what you and other people have said, is a nice guy. Linda is somewhat controversial in the community for her bad takes. I personally dislike her for ruining the end of season 5 for no reason other than she's an asshole. But I don't know if you want to discuss this topic.
I think Linda has a temper, and I don't think she's that good on Twitter and things like that. But there was an incident that after season 5 was it the burning of Shireen happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then inside the episode, D&D said that George told them that the burning of Shireen was a thing, that this is coming from George. And I think Linda got angry about them spoiling the books by saying that Shireen was going to be burned in the books. And then I think she spoiled something. And
she spoiled Brienne killing Stannis in the show. We don't know if this is going to happen in the books, but it was very clear in season 5 that the show was diverging from the books, and everything we did see in season 5 and onwards was essentially spoiler. So fuck her for that. All that being said, let's get into the interview. Now, I'm taking the summary here from someone on Reddit. I do want to give this person some credit. Shout out to ambitious_ad9419 for summarizing most of it. So basically, the intro here is...
but not ambitious_9412, who's just an asshole.
Yeah, fuck that guy. The intro here is basically giving us essentially, what you said that they do. Elio and Linda's task is to organize and structure all of the available info of the Song of Ice and Fire world. That's why they are the 2 people who know mostly everything there is to know. They work with George R.R. Martin, and they helped him create a database, the World of Ice and Fire. They also give instructions here to illustrators on what the character should look like. At one point in the podcast...
That's actually... Yeah, that's one of the things that was kind of interesting, is that they revealed that... Because Elio and Linda actually admitted that they would write stuff, and on the stuff they wrote, they were given very little leeway on creating their own thing. This was all kind of like George's world.
Mm-hmm.
And... George kind of took control of what exactly could be printed. They said they were given some leeway on the free cities in the World of Ice and Fire, but for the most part, you're reading George's stuff. And there was even something that I thought was really peculiar that was in the World of Ice and Fire. It was specifically about the Winged Knight in the Vale. And the history of the Winged Knight in the books is specifically one thing. And in the World of Ice and Fire, it's something else. And, I said, I emailed Elio and I was like, is this something that you came up with? Because in the books it says something this. And Elio said, no, it's just some sort of strange retcon that George put in. I had nothing to do with it. And I was like, okay, really interesting, okay. And he repeated like so little of what of us is in that book. It's almost all George. But they did admit that there's some stuff in the Free Cities that they got to creatively write. But they did say that they are given a lot of creative freedom for telling artists what stuff looks like. That George trusts their opinion on like the accuracy of what a dragon might look like, or what a certain character's hair color or eyes would look like and stuff, because he trusts that they would know, and he's forgotten.
Poor George. At one point, the interview goes into the Blood Moon, the Game of Thrones the original Game of Thrones prequel that would have focused on the Long Night and the White Walkers. Basically, Elio and Linda, they said they don't know why it was canceled, but they suppose it was because of Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night, where, my idea as to why is a combination of two things as to why it was canceled. The first thing is that after Episode 3 of Season 8 and how everything turned out, I think the interest in the White Walkers from the community and the viewers and the fandom waned a lot, and people didn't care as much. I think that's the fault of the showrunners for the way they wrote how that battle and how the walkers turned out. And I also think it's a mix of what Dragon Demands said, how HBO wanted to do something a bit racial, where the Children of the Forest were originally people that had darker skin tones, and towards the end of the series, they would somehow be cursed to look like the Children of the Forest we see in the show later on. Curse of Ham type of stuff. So I think it's a mix of both of those things, personally speaking. But in that regard, it also goes into what their job for the show was. Apparently they were consultors for the show. I don't know if it was for Game of Thrones or Blood Moon or both.
Well, they said it was very brief. They said they were brought in for a couple days to talk actually mainly about the introduction, like opening sequence. So they this is something that was really interesting in the interview, is that Blood Moon was going to open up with a map sequence that was much like the beginning of Game of Thrones. So like Game of Thrones opens with the stone table, the stone table from Dragonstone, essentially. And you're kind of going around the map looking at everything. And that there would be a similar table carved from weirwood, and they'd be going around the north, looking at the different houses in the north. And they brought him in to talk about, who were the major houses at the time. For example, there'd be no Manderley in the north at the time, but there would be a Blackwood in the north, that kind of stuff. So that, they essentially were brought in to talk about the different houses in the different areas and the sigils and who would be in power during the period of time on Blood Moon, because there was going to be this weirwood table opening to the show.
That sounded pretty cool. I kind of wish we could have seen some of that. Like I said, I have not bought a Game of Thrones Blu-ray DVD since the end of Season 5. Season 5 is the last Blu-ray I have. I would have bought the entirety of the complete series if we got one episode from Blood Moon.
Oh, by the way, Elio revealed in that interview that he stopped watching Game of Thrones after Season 5.
I know, it's in here as well. Yeah, I find that fucking hilarious. They also talk about briefly the Nymeria spin-off, the travel of Nymeria and the Ronar after the escape of the Roin, blah, 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 and the Dornish conquest, family struggles. I don't understand why this is here. Like, I feel like this is like common knowledge. Was there any...
Yeah, they discussed... I think there were some discussions very briefly, because they were not involved yet with the one that's in production now, but there were some discussions about that they'd heard or about how they thought it was going to be a traveling show, that 10,000 ships was going to be, Numeria goes to this culture and then goes to this culture and over again. And that way you could get all sorts of different, it would be a Sinbad-like show of the different adventures. Perhaps like Battlestar Galactica, where you have like these 10,000 ships, you have this huge society going along, but that would be, it would be a show where you could explore Sotheros and the Summer Islands or whatever, and explore different cultures, and you could also like cast a very diverse group of people to be in the show. But then they heard that actually it was going to be more about them already being in Dorne after the arrival, and that would be more about like the political thing there, because you wouldn't want two traveling shows to be on at the same time. Like if you're going to have the Corlys Velaryon show, which is a traveling show, would you really want 10,000 ships being a traveling show at the same time?
I mean, look, we've said this before and I'll say it again, and I feel like it needs to be honed in. They're taking a huge gamble with these quote-unquote traveling shows with Corlys, because for the most part, I would argue that more than 80% of the audience are not like diehard book fans. They're not on YouTube looking up Preston Jacobs videos. They're not like, they don't know anything about the Dornish master plan. They don't really care about Ashai. These are people who, when they think of Game of Thrones, they think of Starks, Lannisters, dragons, ice zombies. Why the fuck would more than half of the viewer base care about Dorne when they didn't like Dorne to begin with? The showrunners fucked
Which kind of actually made Blood Moon a fairly good idea, because you're still dealing with the North, you're still dealing with Starks, the main characters, you're still dealing with White Walkers and things like that. Like, you still have familiar elements,
I would pay so much money to see that one episode, and why the fuck he decided to scrap, what was it, 10, 30 million bucks for that episode?
Yeah, but also because you're a huge fan of Naomi Watts, I know.
Sure, why not? We also have some detail on Fire and Blood Part 2, or Blood and Fire, whatever the fuck it's going to be called. According to Elio and Linda, it'll end with Robert's rebellion, of course, we all knew that, but it won't be written till A Song of Ice and Fire is complete. So in short, it'll never come out.
Right, but keep in mind that this interview took place long before.
That's right.
The George's blog post where he's kind of changed anything. In fact, in this interview, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not a Dunkin Egg show would happen. And now we know that the Dunkin Egg show is happening, and that George has, his all of his hopes on it. So there's some speculation about future shows, but we actually know much more about the shows now because it's been so much time.
Good point. It also says here that Aegon IV will be the longest part. I believe that's the start of the Blackfire Rebellions.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting little bit actually. So he was Elio was talking about how, you could easily have like, based on the amount of time that's passed and the number of kings, you could conceivably have a Fire and Blood Part 2 and a Fire and Blood Part 3. Right, that, if you're talking about the number of kings and the amount of time passing, like, why not? Like, because this is the idea that, Fire and Blood Part 1 only makes it to 130 years, and the main story is in 300. So the second half would be 170 years, and he has more, as time goes on, he has more details about what's going on. The further back you go, the fewer details there are, and then the details get thicker and thicker as you go on. So you could imagine that, 170 years, let's say that the second book is another 100 years, then that last 70 is going to be, a lot of stuff. But Elio also said that that's not really a great way to look at things, because George writes time periods inconsistently. Like, if you look at Fire and Blood, he's like, Aegon the Conqueror has very little written about him considering how long he ruled. And so, and the Dance of the Dragons gets a huge amount of space over a very brief amount of time. So he says, it just all depends. It all depends on what George feels like writing. And he's correct. But I did not know, because I would have not expected this. But he says he said that he's got a very thick file on Aegon the Fourth, Aegon the Unworthy. Now you'd think that, he might have a huge file on Aegon the Fifth, Aegon the Unlucky, or Aegon the Egg. Aegon the Unlikely, because of Dunkin Egg and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's a whole bunch of stuff on Aegon the Fourth, which is that's a fascinating thing. I could probably do an entire video on my thoughts on why Aegon the Fourth is such an important king, but I think it mainly has to do with like what he was trying to do with marrying different women and genetics and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Bracken and Blackwood and things like that. But yeah, it just depends on what kings he cares about, which ones he doesn't. Like how much would you write on Jaehaerys II? I don't know. I don't know.
So continue on with the interview. Elio and Linda, they do not care about House of the Dragon, and the show has a lot of space to make things up. Did they discuss that?
So yeah, and when they say they don't care about House of the Dragon, what they mean is their perspective was, look, the characters in Fire and Blood are not fleshed out at all, and they have no emotional attachment to them like they do to the main series.
Right.
This is written from a historical perspective, and so it's not like, if somebody changes the personality of Aemond One-Eye Targaryen, that anyone would notice, because you hardly know anything about this person's personality. While like changing the personality of, say, Euron is a big deal to them. So like that's, Elio and Linda are very emotionally invested in Ice and Fire, and so when certain changes are made, they get, they have big opinions on them. But
big opinions, that's an understatement. Isn't Linda called like racist? Because
I would say Linda's more emotional than Elio. Yeah. But they're very attached, and so but they said they are not that attached to Fire and Blood. That whatever. Changes could be made.
I'm glad you mentioned Euron. They say that, and remember, this is not definitive speculation, but once again, they're close to George, so I wouldn't, sleep on this. They say that Euron is a liar. That it is possible that he never went to Valeria, but near Valeria, and that he could even have gotten the horn and the armor from some other place near the peninsula.
So one of the things that when watching it, I was like, okay, Elio and Linda are they're on the mark here, is that they stressed at many points in the interview that George writes ambiguously, and that he, they mentioned this with the histories, they mentioned that, this is from the mouth of a maester, and we're not really sure how things happened. And then they talk about, unreliable narrators in Ice and Fire. And so like a lot of people read the Forsaken chapter. And I remember this when it was first read, people being like, oh my gosh, Euron's been to Valeria, confirmed. And it's like, no, Euron thinks Euron went to Valeria. That's very different from Euron went to Valeria, confirmed. And so I'm happy that Elio and Linda did recognize, author bias and POV bias and things like this, and people being deluded. And they stressed this a lot during the interview, that things are ambiguous. But then they also mentioned that George changed his mind. Like they think that maybe George now wants Euron to be a different character. Who knows? So they kind of left it open. They were a little non-committal on it, but they personally don't think that Euron's been to Valeria. But at the same time, they said, but maybe George has changed his mind and Euron has been to Valeria. But they were shocked by that line as well.
Well, George changing his mind on how characters are supposed to be. I mean, we've seen it before. The actress who played Osha in Game of Thrones. He liked her performance so much. He's kind of he said he kind of wants to write the character going forward, kind of like her.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
I definitely also think. I mean, I think that Tyrion himself. If you look at Tyrion in A Dance with Dragons, he's much more like book Tyrion than Tyrion through, in A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, or A Storm of Swords. Like he's cracking jokes and things like that. But yeah, so he is influenced. He changes his mind and he shifts things around. So
on the topic of Valeria, they feel as though Valeria is like a magic Chernobyl, and that when Aerea flew to Valeria, she was exposed to the magic of the Doom. So for those of you who don't recall, Aerea is the daughter of Dreamfire
Rhaena,
right?
And Aegon the Uncrowned,
right? Or as you call him, Aegon 1.5.
Aegon 1.5, yeah.
And if you recall, Aerea, she got on Balerion's back, and she wasn't able to control him, and so Balerion flew supposedly back home and came back with some scars all over his body, and Aerea was infected with the fireworms. Good part of the book. I liked it a lot. But apparently they refer to Valeria as a magic Chernobyl type of situation.
So this is kind of an interesting thing. So one of the things that they also mentioned was Elio brought up 1,000 Worlds quite a bit.
Oh,
actually.
really? There you go.
Yeah, here and there. I wouldn't say quite a bit, but he brought it up. He brought up the 1,000 Worlds a few times, and he did mention that in the 1,000 Worlds, specifically in Tough Voyaging, that genetic engineering is a thing, and so Elio and Linda kind of believe that through the use of both magic and technology, that the Valyrians genetically engineered themselves to be dragon riders. And Linda specifically thinks that literally they have dragon blood in them, meaning literally they have dragon DNA spliced into their code. Now, I personally don't think magic is part of it, but I do think that there's probably some sort of genetic engineering that created dragons. I don't know like which came first, the splicing of their DNA or whatever, or the dragons. But I'm on board with the fact that the Valyrians were genetic engineering people, and that. But I think they did it with technology. Like they literally believe they did it with magic, like using magic to splice DNA. But it was interesting to hear them talk about it like that, because I think over time they have started reading the 1,000 Worlds. In fact, Elio said that he knows the 1,000 Worlds really well, and that if they ever wanted to publish a guide to the 1,000 Worlds, that he could do it. Which is funny that he used that term, Guide to the 1,000 Worlds, because that's the name of my video on the 1,000 Worlds, So, but nonetheless, I think anyone that's read the 1,000 Worlds, like, it kind of changes the way that you think about Ice and Fire. And Elio's read 1,000 Worlds, so his brain, he's been red pilled or whatever, and also, there's a lot of 1,000 World references in the World of Ice and Fire. So I think they did, get familiar with the stories. And it's hard not to read George's other stories and think about genetic engineering, because he wrote about it so much. So it's not surprising that they would come to the conclusion that that sort of thing is going on in Valeria. But it's interesting that they use like magic Chernobyl, like that it's actually radioactive, or that Aerea might be dying of radiation poisoning.
Post-apocalyptic, huh?
Yeah, though I think they specifically said they thought that she was transforming into a dragon, because they thought there was a DNA that when they say Targaryens have the blood of dragons, that's literal. And so by having too much dragon DNA spliced in, that they that somehow it should be transforming into a dragon. Now, this is also like, you got to start because I think another thing that might set him down that road is, for instance, when Rhaego was born, Mirri Maz Duur tells her that oh, the baby like had dragon wings and stuff like that, and there's another reference to dragon wings on babies, I think from in Fire and Blood with one of Rhaenyra's stillborns. At the same time, like they just, which I think is funny, that they don't believe that Euron went to Valeria because they understand that people can be liars. But then they buy that Rhaego had looked like a little dead dragon. You know, like, you don't think Mirri Maz Duur might have been lying? You know, like, oh, well.
There's quite a bit here about Dunkin Egg, which you made a good point about a couple minutes ago, where this interview happened before that George update, where he all but confirmed that he was writing more Dunkin Egg and wanted to go into more detail. But according to this, George R. R. Martin will write more stories. There will be from 9 to 11 short stories, but he has notes about what will happen in each tale, and Summerhall will be the last story.
Yeah, well, Elio had said that he says that there was an incident where George had a tell, where they were at some con and somebody asked him about how many Dunkin Egg stories would there be. And he said that George makes up a number that changes every time. You know, sometimes he's like 12 and sometimes he's like 8, and it's like, whatever. And, you know, he says, oh, but we'll have a bunch of different stuff where, you know, one where he's like Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, or one where he's like Master of Arms at the Red Keep. And then Elio kind of blurted out, and the last one would be Summerhall. And George kind of looked at him and smiled. And so he's like, so like that's kind of like why, but it's also like, come on, like we know that Dunkin Egg die at Summerhall, so of course it's going to be the last story. You know?
Well, in regards to the series, the Dunkin Egg series, they don't need George's help. The plot is already planned. That's either a good thing or a bad thing, because that story still has a ways to go before we get to Summerhall.
Yeah, I mean, I know that. Look, George's notes for the She-Wolves of Winterfell are pretty detailed, and so we know we at least have like four seasons of story. I don't know if George has figured out what Dunk does after that, but we kind of know that just from the World of Ice and Fire, a lot of She-Wolves of Winterfell information is kind of published in that a family tree and stuff like that. But so, you know, he's got all that down, but who knows after that. They said that with Dunkin Egg, and this was an interesting idea, is they said, you know, they said that George felt bad about Game of Thrones going ahead of what he'd written. But they said that doesn't mean George necessarily means that he feels bad about things going ahead of his novel prose. That I think if they said that if he were involved in, say, script writing, and he were writing scripts on Dunkin Egg, then he would feel it was his writing and he'd be fine with it. It was the fact that like the Game of Thrones show was ahead of like what he had come up with himself and written himself. But writing himself doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of prose in a novel. Which I could also see like George being like, because they said that he could write a script in like a month, you know, and then he'd feel better about the show being where he wanted it to be, but you know, it wouldn't necessarily be a short story that would be published, you know. But
couldn't he just? Nah, that'd be dumb. I was gonna say, couldn't he just write Dunkin Egg stories as he went along writing the scripts? But nah, that's. I would rather have the stories first before the show. But to top off the Summerhall Tragedy thing, because that's a huge point in the community. Everybody has theories about what happened. And everybody is just itching to find out what happened. According to this, Egg tried to bring dragons back using a magic ritual. and a dragon, quote unquote, was born, but it was not the dragon that Egg wanted.
That's what they said. They said that their theory, and this is a lot out of like Linda's mouth. Like sometimes, a lot of times, Linda says like a theory, and she says, "Oh, we believe," and then Elio kind of nods. But so Linda said that we believe that Egg kind of tried to summon a dragon and was successful, but something went wrong. It was not what they expected, and all the fire was everywhere and killed everybody. Which I'm trying to think like if that's what I would expect like at Summerhall, because I think most people just assume at Summerhall it's just a bunch of wildfire. But the idea that maybe they were actually successful in hatching a dragon like Daenerys is, but then what would this hatchling do, or why would the dragon be something different, and why would it go crazy? But I don't know. Actually summoning a dragon, having the dragon like kill everybody is a bit more fantastical than I kind of picture Game of Ice and Fire doing. I don't know.
Well,
Like I always assumed it was just a big wildfire.
yeah, right.
Fire.
That's what it kind of like seemed like. But people in the fandom they always want to speculate on something even more grandiose. We recently did the quiz with Glidus, and some of those theories just Jesus Christ. So this I want to touch on more on later, because there's actually someone in the thread went into did the whole transcript. For the Winds of Winter, they would love to read the Daenerys Fire and Blood path. I don't know if this is the person's error, but it will be described as triumphant, and Dany will also be turning dark. They also want to know about the Dornish plot too.
Yeah, they specifically said that that they specifically talked about the show and how that they think a lot of the events of the show will be happening, but they'll make sense, is what they'll say. So they're like, yes, Dany's going to go dark, but it's going to make sense. It's not just going to happen like, overnight. And so they believe that which there was an interview, there was a question for George at a con about that. They're like, oh, is Dany really going to like embrace her dark side, Fire and Blood? And George is like, well, we're definitely going to be seeing her be a little darker as time goes on. And so everybody's just like, confirmed, Dany's going evil. She's that happened at a con years ago, but I don't know. So, but yeah, Linda kind of made fun of the show and said, it's not just going to be some ringing of the bells that have her.
I have the whole thing here, and this is also in regards to King Bran. Where they said he will be king, but he will not leave the cave, and it will make sense. So let me just read the whole thing here.
Yeah, I definitely disagree with that, but yeah.
So the host said, I'd like to know, since you know George better than anyone and his way of working, what would you say to the part of the fandom who is afraid that the book's ending will be as disappointing as the show's ending? To which Linda chimes in, the way the show was made was due to the constraints of television. The decision to make only 8 seasons, HBO and George stated that it would be more, although George said they took a different path in some things, and George will be faithful to what he intended. Dany's dark turn will be there, but it will make more sense. She won't just flip at the sound of some bells. She's not a cyborg who is programmed to go crazy when it hears a sound to massacre people. It's going to make more sense. Initially, we were saying that Bran on the Iron Throne would be the ending, and a version of that is correct, but again, there are always...
To be fair to the show, it was not just the bells. I mean, like, yes, Dany's turn happened fast, but there was the feeling isolated at Winterfell, losing Jorah, feeling that Jon was going to usurp her position, losing Missandei, there was losing her dragon. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. It happened way too fast, but there was a lot of stuff. Like, had that happened over the course of 2 seasons, we'd probably be like, oh yeah, it makes sense. But like the fact that it happened over the course of 2 episodes is what got people upset.
Well, this here is what you would want to dispute. There are always ways where it could be Bran without it being Bran. This is Linda. I'm
Yeah.
continuing on with Linda as she's saying, as you know, the bodies. I think Bran's body will stay where it is. It seems like it's hard to make it move again. To be honest, I don't know what she means by that, but it will all make sense. The characters, their choices will make sense. How they develop until a satisfactory conclusion of their arcs. This is what George is struggling with. He knows very well it will take time. He knows very well that it has to take a certain amount of pages for you to get on board with these changes. So no one who reads the books finds it strange or out of character in any way that Jaime has a point of view or gets partially redeemed. So why there is a turn in Daenerys, for example, can George do it well? Yes, he can. We know he can, but it's complicated on a character level and a plot level. And making it quickly wasn't the best choice.
Yeah, that was really weird because if you think of, I mean, what they were suggesting is that Bran would sit the throne, but he would be doing it in somebody else's body, as if either he's doing the murderous thievery in a situation of Hodor, which is creepy and disgusting. He's taking over somebody's body, or he's going to be like animating a dead body, like animating a corpse of Jon or something, But both of them are super creepy. But how could anyone come to the end of Game of Thrones and be like, oh, Bran is taking over somebody's body and the other person is going to live in their own subconscious screaming, unable to control themselves, like being John Malkovich. And Bran, and we're just going to be like okay with Bran on the throne. That'd be the creepiest, saddest, dystopic ending. But we also know that Hold the Door is happening, right? Like, so Hold the Door is happening. Bran's escaping. We've got that. It's I don't know. It seems pretty certain to me that Bran is leaving that cave.
I mean, that's what they said here. So,
I know. I don't buy that.
The other thing here that I thought was super interesting is that George R.R. Martin, they ask, I guess, what's going on with George, why is it taking so long, and apparently he's always trying to correct his books, rewriting parentheses, making his characters be in correct place at the correct time is what he is struggling with the most. And from what she just said, it sounds like that's the main thing that George is trying to do. He's trying to make sure that everything lines up perfectly because, Myrni's not and all that. It's
yeah. There's an old saying, I wrote you a 5-page letter. If I had more time, it would have been one, but that actually like that. Good concise writing, good concise writing is much harder than lengthy writing. And so they more or less think that the problem is that George is trying to take what he has and make it short enough so that he can fit everything in 2 books. I think that's impossible.
That's starting to sound impossible.
Yeah, I mean, he did it before. If everything went back to the economy of Game of Thrones, and a Game of Thrones, is very efficient and a lot of stuff happens. If he went back to that writing style, maybe, but he's not going to go back to that writing style. We've already seen the sample chapters from The Winds of Winter. They're completely not in that writing style. It would be very jarring if he suddenly went back to that writing style.
Can you give an examples of from a Game of Thrones to the sample chapters?
Well, let me think. So let's see. In a Game of Thrones, you have the entire story is like a year and a quarter.
Okay.
And certain chapters take place over the course of there's sometimes months between chapters, and you have large movements of armies and sometimes battles off screen that we don't see. For instance, the Battle of the Whispering Wood, major battles that happen kind of off screen. And when they are on screen, for instance, Tyrion's battle at the Green Fork, they're not that detailed about the slaughter and the smell of the air and the blood and a head rolling here or whatever. It's faster, it's briefer. There's not as much description. When you get to, say, the Battle of Fire, and you have these chapters from Victarion and Tyrion and Barristan, it's a completely different writing style. You're in the moment. You're smelling and tasting everything. I mean, it's more like the Blackwater. The Blackwater is a pretty detailed battle in it being written, and so all of them are kind of getting that way. If not even more detailed than the Blackwater. But battles in a Game of Thrones are not like that. Plus, like in a Game of Thrones, people march across the continent, but we don't hear them marching across the continent. Like Catelyn takes a ship from Winterfell to King's Landing, and then travels back up to the Inn at the Crossroads, and then travels to the Vale. And we get very little description of what her ship journey was like, what the roads are like between King's Landing and the Inn at the Crossroads. Like, even the walk on the Mountains of the Moon, like there's a little more, but not much actually. And then she travels from there to Moat Cailin, like pretty quickly, and then down to River Run, and like you don't hear about each and every stop like you do with, say, Tyrion traveling to see Daenerys.
I know that's
or Ariana traveling to see Jon Con. Like these are very detailed travel logs, and you don't get that in Game of Thrones. There's not the travel logs. The battles are not these detailed bloodfests. They just kind of happen. And so George would have to go back to that efficiency, and he's not, but it would be so jarring to go back to that efficiency because it was kind of a slow transition out of that. But
well, on one hand, I kind of like the how he does it now because it kind of world builds, but at the same time, for efficiency's sake, like, you can't keep doing it. I agree with you. You can't keep doing it and expect to just finish it in 2 books.
Yeah, no, you're right. I do like his later writing style. I think A Storm of Swords, A Feast for Crows, and A Dance with Dragons, I enjoy reading those books more than A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings. But I admit that it's also not efficient at all.
More about what you said, dragon taming. Valyrians literally have dragon blood. The Valyrian wyverns and fireworms were used to create the dragons. This explains the dragon half-breeds. Aerea was turning into a half-dragon because of the magic of Valeria, and Valyrians have literally have dragon genes, which explains demi-dragon children of Daenerys, Rhaenyra, and they created the dragons using blood magic.
Yeah, I don't buy any of that. I mean, like I said, we talked about this before. I don't believe that, like, I don't believe they have dragon, like, genes spliced into them. I believe that they are perhaps genetically engineered animals that are going to obey, telepathically gifted individuals. But I don't think.
Well, it says right here, we will know why some Valyrians can tame dragons and some cannot.
Right. Well, they have the gene, I mean, they mention that it's all genetic. I mean, I think most people understand that dragon riding is genetic, but we kind of know that warging skin changing is genetic as well. I personally don't think there's any fundamental difference between the two, but whatevs.
And
telepathy is telepathy is telepathy.
This one piece of interesting information to end off the whole thing is the Mummer's Dragon. Elio and Linda think that fake Aegon, also known as Fagon, is Illyrio's son. Tyrion's clothes and the sword removed from the sculpture are clues that support this claim. They believe that fake Aegon, young Griff, are essentially Illyrio's son with his wife Sarah, and that he was he's not Rhaegar's son, but he was raised to be Aegon, so he kind of is.
I mean, I listened to this part and I agree with Elio's reasoning that Varys believes that power resides where people think it resides, and but at the same time, I do know people that have like studied the timeline, and that Sarah Sarah and Illyrio cannot actually be um, the 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 mother of Aegon. And I'm trying to remember the reasoning. Um, Let me see here. Do 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 do. I gotta look this up because this is a big thing. I think a lot of people assume like what is um a lot of people think that okay, we need some sort of reasoning for Illyrio to be so invested in Aegon. Um, but it's but I'm trying to remember like why exactly, like timeline wise it can't happen. Um, let's see here. Da, 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 da. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. I'm going to have to do more research on it because I've never um uh I'm not going to find it now, but I think there are problems with the timeline of Sarah actually being the mother of um of young Griff. Oh well. But they possibly they think that they think it's true.
That's an interesting thing because we fake Aegon being Illyrio's son, that's been floated around in the community for quite some time. But what's
Yeah.
the main theory of who he really is? That he's a Blackfire.
So yeah, there's a few things. Um, um, and actually, Elio brought this up that it's maybe he's also a Blackfire or also like the spawn of Aryan Bright Flame and things like these. These are theories going around the fandom for a while. And since Fire and Blood, some people think Sarah Targaryen as well, like could be related. Um, could be a person and her descendants could be part of this as well. But it's let's see. Hold on. Ah, got it. Okay. This is on that specific issue. I found it. Okay. All right, from this is a Reddit post from Mark G171, debunking something about the theory of young Griff. Many people believe that Aegon is not Rhaegar and Aelia's son, but rather Illyrio and Sarah's son as part of the popular Phaegon theory. While Aegon possibly isn't Rhaegar and Aelia's son, he certainly is not Sarah's son. From an appendix, we learn that young Griff is 18 years old, which of course is a reasonable age for Aegon Targaryen, who is supposedly Aegon was born in 281, and thus the current year 300, he would either be 19 or 18, turning 19, thus the age checks out. What doesn't check out is Sarah in this, if young Griff is 18. The Worlds of Ice and Fire, we learn that Varys must have been brought over to Westeros in or around 280-ish, given that he's brought over in the years following Steffon Baratheon's death in 278, but before the Harrenhal tourney of 281, as Varys warns Aerys of Rhaegar's plot. So the gods have the notion, however, yeah, okay, so we got all that. Now the reason why this is important is because Aerys obviously can only import Varys after or around the time Varys first makes a name for himself over in Pentos. So Aerys has no reason to select Varys of all people unless Varys already has a reputation for information gathering. That's true. And so Varys gets brought over in around 280. Why is this important? Well, Illyrio tells us that he married his first wife during the same time period that Varys gets brought over to Westeros, aka Illyrio married his first wife in 280. If Aegon is born in 281, then his mother is either impregnated in 280 or early 281, and therefore Illyrio wasn't with Sarah yet. He married Sarah. He was married to his first wife. Now, so then how did Sarah die? Sarah died of the Great Death. And the Great Death, we learn, is grayscale. And the most famous case of grayscale in the book is Shireen, who got it in 289. Let's see here. We see that Illyria is still mourning Sarah, which suggests that she died fairly recently. But if we assume that Sarah was the mother of Aegon, who was again born in 281, and she's mourning a woman who we'd be establishing is almost dying 20 years ago instead of recently, it's far more likely that she's much more recent than that. That's all kind of true. He should have been married to his first wife during Aegon's birth 19 years before. And the grayscale outbreak, which happened 7 to 8 years ago. Yeah, that's all kind of true. Yeah. So in conclusion, Sarah, not Aegon's mom.
So Sarah is not Aegon's mom because it just doesn't line up with how old he is.
Right. I mean, even if we assume that
maybe he's younger than we know, and that.
I mean, he might be a little younger. He might be like 16, but that still doesn't make him young enough to be, he's somewhere between like 19 and 16. He's somewhere in that range. So, but that means that like Illyrio's first wife needs to die, and then he needs to immediately go with Sarah and have her have that kid pretty quick, and then have Varys already in the Seven Kingdoms, like kind of planning for the return of a child that isn't born yet. I don't know. It's just so lucky that Illyrio has Varys as a friend in the Seven Kingdoms already. When this child it's all kind of weird.
This could be easily retconned by George. Like, he can go back and change a few details here and there and make it so.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. I never really subscribed to the whole fake Aegon thing. I don't really know where I stand on that. Like I said, in regards to the pink letter, I'm very boring when it comes to theories. But I do like the idea that he could be Illyrio's son.
I mean, my theory on it is that it doesn't matter, that we're never going to find. Well, first of all, we're never going to find out. But I just don't think that it's important. Like he's whoever he is to different people. He can tell some people he's a Blackfire. He can tell some people he's Rhaegar's son, and it doesn't really matter who he is, because it's the story,
Well, it's a shame. Hopefully we do find out. Hopefully it is addressed, but we'll have to see. Is there anything else about the interview you'd like to get out of the way?
No, I guess that was about it. I'm trying to think of anything else that really really stuck out to me. But
I've always found it weird, to comment on Elio and Linda for a minute, I've always found it weird that they were ahead of the whole Ice and Fire thing before anybody. Literally anybody. And they never, and I'm not trying to be an asshole here when I say this, but they never really found much success in making content off Ice and Fire like you and, other people have. I always find that a little weird.
No, they were just really early fans that were really into the story before nearly all of us were, and happened to have their dream come true, that the story that they were really really into, like the creator chose them to be kind of I don't know, gatekeepers of information. Oh, here's the other thing: is Aegon can't really be much younger because Jon Con was brought in to take care of him when he was about 5. So Jon Con would have noticed if this baby was only 3 when he's supposed to be 5. you know.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that as well.
yeah, so he kind of has to be around 18 or 17 or 18, and Illyrio was married to his first wife in that period of time. Oh well. But yeah, no, I mean it's interesting. It's all interesting, but like I say, everything is kind of their opinions. Um, you know, it's not necessarily canon. You know, the stuff about like, oh, he has a file on Aegon the Fourth, I found more interesting because, oh gosh, like that's actually something tangible versus like we think it's fire magic in Valeria. Well, you know, it's your speculation is as good as any other fans, you know.
I would argue their speculation is slightly, more interesting than some random YouTuber because once again they're closer to George. They've seen things I would assume that would make them speculate in that direction.
Sure, you know, but early on they were actually before Dance with Dragons came out, they were actually in a camp that a kind of Littlefinger planned it all camp, where they thought kind of everything was done by Littlefinger, and then once Quaithe and Marwyn and Bloodraven were kind of revealed, they kind of stepped back from that. But they're like the rest of us. They're wrong about stuff. They speculate on stuff. They've got their opinions about stuff. But like I say, like thinking that Bran is going to sit the throne by skin changing somebody.
Proxy.
Yeah, via proxy, skin changing somebody else's body. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's just but at the same time that there's a lot of similarities. Like Elio's favorite area is Dorne and the Ironborn. Well, my favorite is also Dorne and the Ironborn. Like he's read a lot of Thousand Worlds stuff, and he understands what George is writing and what he's capable of and things like that. He understands that the story is from a lot of unreliable points of view and things like that. So I don't think they're married to any idea. They just kind of have these different theories on things, and so some of them are going to be right, some of them are going to be wrong. But yeah, Bran sitting the throne via proxy is that's not going to happen.
You're so against it. I love it.
Oh, it's just no, it's just it would be a horrible, disgusting way to end the story. But okay.
Do you mind if we wrap it up here?
Sure thing.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we'll see you next time. Have a good one.